Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, February 1st, 2018. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. Also back, it's the A-Team. Great to have him back. Luke Thomas, SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. Chuck Mindenhall, a.k.a. the man in the hat of The Ringer and MMAfighting.com. And, of course, the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. They are all here, and we have much to discuss because on Friday of last week, my friends, the UFC, which, you know, typically in the PR business, you want to put out your best news on Friday night, right? You want to come out
I was
there.
waiting for someone to say something about that. They put out their best news at the worst time.
Typically, I was kidding, of course. You put out the worst news on Friday night.
They
yes, I know, exactly. But you're sitting there on a Friday night. You know what? Let's put it on the weigh-in show on a Friday afternoon when no one's watching. That's the time to announce DC versus Miocic, champ versus champ, a fight that will be headlining UFC 226 on July 7th in Las Vegas. It's the heavyweight champion versus the light heavyweight champion. Of course, it's for Miocic's heavyweight title. Now, a lot of us have had some time to digest. You've talked about it. We've all sort of talked about it in our own way. Here we are 6 days later. Did they make the right call? Is this the best fight to make for both men?
Those are two different questions.
Is it?
Yeah, that's two different questions.
Okay, tell me why.
Because there's a series of competing interests.
Okay.
For Daniel Cormier, you have your own set of interests, given how long you're going to be in the sport, given who's available, how much money's on the line. Stipe Miocic, you have your own set of considerations, his own particular set of complaints, right, about not being promoted in a way that was sort of full-throated and everything else. If you're the UFC, you have a variety of commitments, International Fight Week, how are we going to deliver all this content, who's going to host Tough. So there's a lot of, here's what I would say. I think it makes sense for all the parties involved in the short term. I have some serious long-term considerations that I don't think we're having enough of an examination of, because everyone's in the middle of this post-announcement orgy, which happens every time. Every time a cool fight Every time a cool fight is announced, everyone drops their pants and the orgy begins. And then there's never any consideration about how ashamed they're going to feel when the orgy is over.
So let's consider them. This is the place to consider them.
Right.
So why don't we talk about the orgy?
Yeah, this is really, I don't know what happened to me just now, but look, point being is this. Long term, I think I have some concerns about the roster being cannibalized. I think, to me, the major identified problem is that they don't have enough natural divisional turnover. There are not enough guys. There was a cool video, I tweeted it out earlier. Forgive my name. I think it's the guy who works at Bloody Elbow. He had a video where it showed the top 10 rankings. And in the left-hand column, it was the top 5, and then 6 to 10. And it showed month over month how the division moved. And what you basically notice is 1 to 5 barely moves at all. And it's the oldest division in terms of the average age of the top 10 participant. Light heavyweight, guys like Jared Cannonier and Misha Serkinov are trying to push through, and they can't. So they can't get turnover. So for July 7th, did they make a great call? I mean, who was against watching this fight? I can't find a person on earth. But in terms of long-term considerations, to me, the issue is they can't manage all the divisions they have. They're not doing enough talent recruitment to move them along. And this does nothing to solve that problem.
What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I agree on a lot of those points, but to me, I was like, it was the Cain Velasquez thing coming out of that night, you know, in Boston. I was like, you're thinking about Cain Velasquez, how he might factor into all of this. But the bottom line was, I don't know what they've talked about. Maybe you know more, like how they kind of reconciled, talking about Daniel Cormier. And, you know, at that point, you think, as long as they've got it worked out, that side of it, the Daniel Cormier side of it, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. And they're coaching tough, right? So there's some, at this point in his career, why not? You know, all of that type of thing. Although I personally don't care about Tough anymore. These guys they must make good money doing this, and I don't know what kind of exposure you get at it at this point, but for a guy like Miocic, who they've been trying to get over for a long amount of time, it kind of makes sense. From just the standpoint of who's there to challenge them, that's really where I come in. The only thing I don't like about it is it's so far set off. That's everything. Every time something happens on Tough, or it's going to be a tough thing, it's always going to be 6 months down the line. And that's what I don't like about the divisions, then get snagged basically for the year. You're talking about maybe now third to fourth quarter before any other movement can happen.
But they just fought, though, right? I mean, often it's not coming right after both guys
But it's
fight.
it's more like it's so telegraphed. Like, obviously, we're talking about UFC 226. We don't even know what UFC 225 is yet.
Sure.
So you're planting something that far down the line. And it's just, you have to wrap your mind around that very fact that anybody else that's coming up in that time is going to have to wait, you know, and I think that part kind of sucks, but at the same time, Daniel Cormier haven't been, I mean, you were the one kind of tooting this one, like he should go back to heavyweight when he's done with this fight, and here he is, and I dig that on this level of his competitiveness and where he can go, because A Gustafsson fight, in my mind, I don't know. I mean, obviously that would be a fun fight. That was a great first fight, but like I don't know what that would do for him beyond that. You know, and that's just another fight. But this one actually has something that moves that needle again for him and gets him a lot of money, and it's a great fight. So I mean, I'm torn, but I keep leaning towards saying, you know what, I could see it makes more sense to me. You know what I mean? Than it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm not too torn at all, really. Even though I understand the points you guys are making about the big picture, the long-term picture. Yeah, I'm trying to look at this simply as a competition and saying, well, you know, what are my criteria for making a heavyweight title fight? Well, one, it has to be a legitimate fight. It has to be the challenger has to be somebody who legitimately deserves that fight. And certainly Daniel Cormier, even though he hasn't been fighting at heavyweight for quite a while, is a legitimate challenger for this. And is there somebody else who is being kind of pushed aside in order for this to happen? There really isn't someone being pushed aside. I mean, Gustafsson maybe a little bit at light heavyweight, but not like he has this incredibly strong claim on a title challenge at light heavyweight. And really heavyweight, I don't think there's somebody who's being pushed aside either. So I'm just going to look at it from the perspective of, did they make a good fight? Did they make a really great fight? They made a fight that I think has a lot of appeal. And while I agree that there are some long-term ramifications, there always are going to be long-term ramifications. Seems as though the company that is now running the UFC is really thinking about the here and now. And if they're going to do that, well, they damn well better make great fights, and they've made one here.
So last week on the show, we talked about the idea of putting 3 champion versus champion fights on this card. So it would
which is
be
a cataclysmically bad idea.
Miocic, Cormier, TJ, and Cyborg Nunes. Cyborg Nunes, that's the fight Cyborg wants. You know, she wants to be on that card. They want her to be in Rio, which would make sense as well because, you know, it's 2 Brazilian fighters. And I get your point, but is your point more if they do those 3 champ versus champ fights, like that ties up essentially 6 divisions?
Sure.
We've seen a couple of champ versus champ fights, you know,
Yep.
actually 2
Great.
in the history. So are you talking more about the idea of putting all 3, or even Miocic versus Cormier, you know, makes you feel that way, you know, the sort of negative reaction that you brought up earlier?
Sure. I mean, let's be clear about this. It's not the end of the world. There's a lot of ways. Actually, to be fair, in actuality, you could stage all 3 of those fights, and it is possible that if you get just the right outcomes, nothing bad really happens. That's also possible.
What do you mean by just the right?
Well, let's say DC loses, but it's not some sort of kind of catastrophic loss. It's competitive. It's fun.
Yeah.
So there's no 2 divisions being tied up. It's sort of writ large all the way around. However, you know, if DC wins and then, God forbid, of course, gets, you know, catastrophically injured, the nightmare rolls on.
Right.
But to your point, yes, occasionally I think a champ versus champ fight is just fine. At the time they were trying to, I don't know if you would call, today actually, by the way, is the anniversary of Penn versus St. Pierre.
Yesterday.
Yesterday was,
Yep.
right. So we're right on the heels of that.
Yep.
And I think, you know, there are times when you can make this case. And again, you know, you mentioned Gustafsson's really only the fight that you can do for DC at this point, and who would you do for?
You know what's crazy about Gustafsson? He's fought twice since the first DC fight.
Right, I know.
He's fought twice since
Crazy.
2015. I mean, and one fight was against Jan Blachowicz, which wasn't the greatest fight of all time. Like, when you actually look at it, and he got that title shot against DC after getting knocked out
But
brutally.
it also stands to reason. Like, he's trying to sell it online, and I think in your mind you would agree, if they fought, it'd probably be a pretty good fight.
Oh, it'd be a great fight, but it's not like he's on like some Tony Ferguson like winning streak here.
To the point that you're raising, here is the issue for me. When they were trying to make St. Pierre versus Silva, for example, there was this long reign of dominance, and there was this notion to me that they cared about the architecture of the sport. Everyone keeps saying, well, what are the long-term consequences? Here's a better question. What is the long-term process that they're going to put in place here? What is the way in which the sport is going to be guided? What is the systems you're putting in place? Because the way it used to be was you would have these divisions where if you ran them into the ground, in the sense of not that you run over the contenders, but that the champ had done all the work. And St. Pierre, by the way, had done several rematches before they even suggested a fight with Silva. That was your built-in architecture. To me, if you want to do these champ versus champ fights, there's a good reason to do them. Just tell me what the plan is. Because when I'm looking from the outside looking in, I don't see a plan. I see them thinking, we need to fill that card in July, and we don't really know how this is going to go. That is what gives me pause.
And international fight weeks have been a little bit bad, right? I think that, so in some ways, I feel like their intentions are always to do something grand, and maybe they're trying to double down given the circumstances this year, kind of the TV deal looming, all that sort of thing. Who knows? But you're right, there's a paradigm shift, and I feel like that's the hardest thing is you see them do certain matchmaking now, and it feels a little bit like you have to figure out, is this the new way that we're operating? Because we're used to an actual structure of contenders rising up. That's been the traditional. And then we've had some of these, the last year where we've had some fights that we had to squint to kind of understand. And we're like, yeah, but they'll get back to normal when these are done. I think the weird part is that we're on a continuation of that vibe. We keep seeing these we keep seeing these champ versus champ. Dana White, back in the day, was the biggest advocate. You had to clean out a division. You didn't even talk about that stuff. They could never even, make some of those big super fights at the time materialize because of various hang-ups with the contenders or timetables and stuff like that. They were impossible to make. But it's like now I feel like that's kind of, they've prioritized it more. They're not exactly super fights because the champions these days turn over so fast. But, it kind of gives them the best pop for a single event. You always wonder, big picture versus small picture, how that affects things, because they were always thinking big picture as they were growing. Now I feel like we're in the small picture realm, you know what I mean?
Moving more directly to the way you phrase your question, having these three so-called super fights, champ versus champ fights on that same card, I guess, individually, all those fights, they'd be a lot of fun to watch. Who wouldn't want to see any one of them? And I don't have a problem with creating champ versus champ fights, but when you put three of them on one card, I know it's like, wow, we're creating something huge, this is big, but it feels like a gimmick to me, and it feels like something that makes it less special. One of the things about DC and Stipe is that's really special. I know we saw McGregor and Alvarez. We saw St. Pierre. No, what was the other one?
Penn.
Yeah, St. Pierre Penn. I mean, we've seen some of these fights out there, but to me, these have to be special. And when you get to DC and Stipe coming into the octagon, and the last time we saw a champ versus champ fight was 10 minutes ago, that doesn't seem special to me anymore. And I want that. I want the build up. Again, I'm talking more like as a promoter here, and that's not really where I like to reside when I'm analyzing fights. But thinking about it from that perspective, I feel like it loses a little bit of its by throwing so much in there, you sort of lose a little bit of the charm of it.
One question that needs to be asked, and I would love to know who has the answer here, because I don't know that I have it, but I at least want to explore the idea. What are the conditions that have to be established for long-term mixed martial arts sustainability? Right? What are the conditions? They do exist. And I don't think WME is coming into the fold and saying, we're going to ruin the sport. I don't believe that at all. I believe they're trying, whether they're succeeding or not, to make a good faith effort. But that's a completely different issue about whether slowly over time we're eroding the conditions that make this a long-term sustainable operation. And we lose some lights.
They're turning off the lights on you.
It's okay. And until that we get a satisfied answer and we know if we're either moving towards that or away from that, I think I have some concern about this self-cannibalization.
You mentioned, I think, one of the last shows you're saying, like, talking to the matchmakers off record all the time, they'd always say that our business is not building champions, it's building contenders, it's building the guys who's going to come up and we sell that contender.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, that's really not what's going on anymore. You know what I mean? That's where it's
what's illuminating to me, and pardon the pun after what just happened, and if we could fix that, I don't know if that was done on purpose or not, but some lights went off behind us. Illuminating to me that in the 16 years that Zuffa was in business, the old Zuffa, the Fertitta Zuffa, they only did one champ versus champ fight, and it was BJ Penn versus GSP, right? They tried to do RDA versus Conor, but I do believe they started to change their way of thinking to try to sell the company and make it into a hot commodity. Since then, they're now, this would be the fourth. If they get through all three of these fights, plus Eddie versus Conor, that would be the fourth champ versus champ fight in the new era, in the WME era. How about this? In the 16 years of the Fertitta era, they only did 1 3-title fight card. And they've done 3 already in the new era. This would be the fourth. They've done 3 in a year and a half. So there is a shift. It's very clear that they try to make the best night possible for one particular evening, right? They tried to make the best card, the hottest names with the most buzz, and then consequences be damned. And I think, in January, it's February 1st today, we have to sort of come to grips with the fact that this is 2018. Every decision that they make in 2018 is related to the TV deal and the negotiations and being a hot commodity and being a hot product. If you look at what's happening, and we'll get to it in a second, and don't worry, fans out there, I hear you loud and clear on Ronda Rousey, but WWE is a hot commodity right now. They have 2 of the biggest MMA stars in their stable, and they're in the midst of TV negotiations as well. The UFC is trying to get hot, and they're not hot in January. Just look at the Fox ratings. I do believe the second half of the year they will be hot. I do believe Conor will come back. I do believe they want Nate Diaz to come back. Miocic versus Cormier, I think, will be fun. DJ, TJ, these are fun things. But right now, they're trying to get people talking. Even the Floyd thing, as ridiculous as it is, it still gets people talking UFC. So they can't be mad at all that, even though they may have nothing to do with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have something to do with it on the back end. So everything they're doing, it's like old model be damned. Old line of thinking be damned. They're not thinking about the way we used to think about the UFC. And I do believe that maybe once they get their TV deal secured and they're happy with it, they may go back to the old way of thinking.
Well, that's the other part. If they get a new TV deal, they can make the adjustments to make a new model work.
Yes.
They've got new priorities with the old model.
This is hotshot booking.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is absolute hotshot booking. Now, in the case of Miocic, Cormier, and even in the case of DJ, TJ, like there aren't that many number one contenders like lining up for these guys. Like Verdum can have a case. He already fought, Gustafsson. But who else is there? There's really, so that's why I'm okay with it. I feel like it's actually a fight that makes a lot of sense. And to your point, Cain is on board with it. So nothing, and even the tough thing, they just fought. It's gravy. None of us are going to watch it, so it doesn't really take away anything from the fight. There was a time where I feel like we watched Tough, and it would take away from the fight, but now we don't even watch it anymore. So in this case, I like it. I don't like putting 3 champ versus champ fights on one night. I think that's just overkill. And to your point, it just kind of takes something away. 2, I can live with, I guess, but there's no need to put 3.
You like 2?
I could live with 2.
So to clarify, you'd like
DJ, TJ.
okay.
Because of the Brazilian connection, why not put those 2 females on?
What if they just put the Brazilian fight in Brazil? What if they did these champ versus champ things on different,
Well, there's 2 months. There's a 2 month gap between there. So at least, someone told me like, how are you tying up 6 divisions? Well, it's pretty clear how you're tying up 6 divisions, right? By your, the guys aren't.
Are these the same people like, dude, the McGregor, Habib, Tony situation is so simple.
Simple.
So simple, bro.
No, the guys aren't going to come back and fight on July 8th. The loser of that fight isn't going to, if DC loses, he's not going to defend his light heavyweight title on July 8th. So there is a huge risk at play. I just think they want to be buzzing. They want to be hot. They want people to talk about them, and that's why they made the decision. In this case, though, it's weird. There is, like, when Conor fought Eddie or was booked to fight RDA, there was a long list of people that should have, fought for the lightweight title. In this case, I don't see that list. So it's a weird thing. Like, I feel like their intentions aren't the right ones because they're doing it just to, hotshot book and get people excited in the TV.
That should give you pause. This whole
it does. It does.
Because then it's like, well, there's no one for DC and Stipe. I can't really argue with that.
Yeah.
If they did it at lightweight, which has the most natural turnover, that's a little bit, that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. So would you guys vote for just one? You would just prefer just to have one champ versus champ fight and do TJ versus DJ on another card?
To me, that's what feels special about this.
I like the distribution of events, you know?
Yeah.
And you have an event with every one of those. I feel like you have a good event. And if you especially get a pretty good co-main, I feel like every one of those is pretty good. The TJ-DJ one particularly because they, DJ has not been able to basically take over the pay-per-view game and for whatever reason. But now you have a fight that I think people will pay attention to. I mean, I think so, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I just think that that's the most compelling fight he's had. You know what I mean? Maybe since going back to Dominic Cruz or something like that. But I would like to just see them distributed, just so there's more events. I don't like when they put a big crater and then we work around that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I feel like that's what would happen if they stack them.
There was a time where they rarely put 2 title fights on a card.
Right.
And now I feel like that's the norm.
Well, this is the part that again really concerns me. I do agree that TJ-DJ would be an incredible fight, but I don't know, maybe he should have done it when he wasn't. It's not the right time to do it because again.
Period.
Not right now.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I'm a little.
What would you do?
Okay. Well, what happens? Let's game this out. TJ goes down there because it'd be at 125, right?
Yeah.
So TJ goes down and he beats Demetrius. Let's say he beats Demetrius within an inch of his life. I mean, crushes him. Okay, which is I don't know that would happen, but let's at least say that would happen.
Yeah.
Now what? Now is he going to go back and is he going to defend again at bantamweight?
Yeah.
He might. But then what's going to happen at 125? Because even if you get the rematch, would people even want to see it if he gets smashed to smithereens? Now you go back and and also there's no title for down there. So my guess is what's going to happen is over time, They're going to create some kind of interim title to get this going again. His record would be ruined. By the way, this all assumes there's no injury.
Right.
There's a lot of ways this could go badly and ruin something that I don't think needs to be ruined. If TJ was not a champion, I would have a lot less problem with this. But the championship commitments, the injury load in MMA, the weight change, he's going down in weight. That is a huge tax on his body.
Prospect, all of what you're saying is what would make it exciting. The fact that there's chaos attached to it.
Okay, exciting. And then the fight's over, and you're like,
of course,
okay,
no, it's true.
But I would say the opposite. I would say the opposite scenario is even more troubling. If, let's say, Demetrius Johnson defeats T.J. Dillashaw, but they're fighting
and then he goes
at
back to
flyweight.
135.
Now your flyweight champion has just beaten your bantamweight champion, and yet the bantamweight champion is still the champion. That's kind of troubling. I mean,
That's what happened with DJ Penn.
well, but it's a troubling scenario, and I feel like that's why I'm a little more comfortable with DC moving up to fight Stipe, with Nunes moving up to fight to fight
Because
Cyborg.
if he loses, at least he lost to a bigger guy.
Yeah, because when the bigger champion loses to a littler person, and that lighter person is not the champion, what does DJ have to reach for? I mean, to me, it's always about reaching for that bigger person and trying to take them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, someone's always going to be, moving up in that scenario. That story is about TJ going down to try to stop the streak, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's a pretty compelling story because no one's been able to do it.
None of these fights are bad. They're all good fights, but here's what they're doing. Well, we have so many divisions, 12 to be precise, that we can't manage, and because we're signing so many guys, we have so many events, we're doing so many things. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. We're not obviously doing enough talent recruitment and procurement. We can't develop enough contenders. I have an idea. We'll use champs as contenders. Pay me big bucks. That is an idea fraught with peril. But because it feels good, everyone just goes, they.
Well, okay. Well,
Because they're good fights. I mean, I think bottom line is that if they were making fraudulent fights just to generate tons of money, I'd be sitting here, squawking about it. But all these fights are really good fights, and maybe the best fights that any of those guys
fight is about as good as it can get, right?
Sure.
For female fighting right now, that's about as big as you can put together.
There's literally no one at 145
Exactly.
at the moment. But you know what the fans are going to say? I know it. I see it. And I even put up a poll about this, and it confirmed what I thought that they were going to say, which was like, I don't care. I don't care about July 8th. I don't care. Like, give me the greatest card of all time.
They say that. And then July 8th comes, and then they're belly aching about why there's another interim champ and why I'm supposed to care. Right. So I just don't. Where's that GIF about the dude dancing? Why the F are you lying? Please play him on the screen now, because you're lying. You think that that's true, and then July 8th comes around, and then God forbid Daniel Cormier breaks his shin like Anderson Silva does, but he, now he can't defend, even if he loses. Now what's going to happen at light heavyweight? Then John Jones comes back, and that could be an issue. Then Cain comes back, and God knows what's going to happen. And now you have a mess. And then, of course, on July 8th, then all the crocodile tears happen. I can see the crocodile tears, Ariel, and I want to stop them.
I do prefer ultimately the organic way of a contender coming up because, like Rose Namajunas, for instance, goes and takes out Jędrzejczyk, and all that did was open up scenarios again within the division, because anybody who was kind of logjam at the top, who couldn't really do anything while Jędrzejczyk held the belt, suddenly is a player again, and that's the kind of replenishing thing that you want to get from all the contenders. So it is strange to contemplate if any of these guys, any of the ones who are challenging for the belt, the champions, are coming over as the interloper. If they win and become the champion, it does create chaos. It's just the way it is. If all three of the existing champions win, it doesn't. You know what I mean? Because they can any of the other ones can go back. It still ties it up, for sure.
Guys aren't
I'm just saying in the thing that you're saying, the domino effect.
When you have someone holding two belts, as we've seen very recently, it creates a lot of problems. Do you agree, though, that this fight, DC versus Miocic, is really all about DC in a way? Like that's the story, right? Him trying
the stakes. Yes.
Yeah. Like Miocic, it's just another fight for Miocic.
Yes and no. I think that if he beats Daniel Cormier, it certainly adds a nice little shine to his resume. But it's more about. I don't quite understand his message because it's actually quite mixed in my judgment. Like, I don't care about being, celebrity. It doesn't matter to me. I want to be on the big fights and the big cards. Well, they're related. But in any case, I guess at least insofar as his more recent concerns are in play. He gets to be on a big card against a big-name opponent, probably the biggest one they can do.
Yep.
It's in a novel champ versus champ. He gets to be on TV for how many weeks leading up to that to promote it? Like, if you didn't think you were getting promoted before, I don't really know what else they could do at this point beyond this. So it satisfies all of those long-standing, or at least, how long those concerns are. But for Cormier, it's history.
Yeah,
that changes it.
Yeah.
But also for
Miocic at least got
Stipe,
more money, though.
Stipe also is competing against a guy who has never lost to anybody but John Jones.
Yeah.
And, say what you want about John Jones, but he's John Jones. It's the only guy that has given Cormier fits. And so Stipe goes out there and smokes him. That's a huge feather in his cap.
It is, but I feel
vice
like the
versa.
story, absolutely. I mean, he's undefeated.
Sneakily two of the best all time.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
absolutely.
you know what I mean?
I'm not taking anything away from the accomplishment of beating DC, who's undefeated as a heavyweight, 13-0. But I just feel like, okay, this is a legacy fight for DC. This is a chance to go up and be just the second man to hold 2 titles, to sort of prove that you were the man at heavyweight, and the only reason you went down was because of your friend. It just feels like this is really like, with him saying, coincidentally, that he's going to retire next March, this is a chance for him to really.
His career is so insane. I remember when we were talking right after he lost to Jones in Anaheim, we were saying there's absolutely no route for him to get back to Jones again. And and then we're like, maybe there isn't. But like, here we are, like
there
a
is
whole
now.
different
There is
scenario.
now. I mean,
Of
his
course.
coach Brandon Gibson,
I know,
Jones'
I saw
coach,
that.
today
Saw that.
tweeted
I saw that.
they're going to fight for the heavyweight belt, and who wouldn't want to see that, right? That new wrinkle. It's amazing to me that this was the fight. Remember the day that, and you were there, the day that Dana White announced or kind of confirmed that Jones had popped. We were there for Mayweather McGregor. We were in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
You were at the Tough Gym,
Yep.
and he said the plan was what? Jones versus Miocic.
Stipe in
This was
December,
Jones's
yeah.
fight. This was Jones's
Cormier
story.
is taking all
Yes.
of
That's what I said.
This was Jones's
I said that. I was like, he's basically subtweeting. This is a great subtweet game he's got going on here.
Unbelievable. Like, what is this man in Albuquerque thinking right now? This was all supposed to be mine.
right.
Imagine DC beats Stipe, and there comes Brock Lesnar, who's a free agent, by the way, come April in WWE. Like, that could happen. That could really happen.
It's
This
so
was
true.
all John Jones' stuff. And his greatest rival, who he beat twice, is there, like, dancing.
And then,
It's unbelievable. What a story. Who could have predicted this?
So if Daniel Cormier wins, he'll beat at least the most successful UFC heavyweight champ of all time.
Yep.
If you can call him the GOAT too at heavyweight if you want, but at least the former, if not the latter. Then on top of that, depending on one's perspective, this is quite arguable, but depending on one's perspective, you could say, sure, he lost to Jones twice, but Jones, surrounding both fights, had these anti-doping infractions. To what extent does that cloud the certainty of a win, or how much did it help him? Again, these are very debatable things. But if you're Cormier, you can at least put an asterisk by the 2 losses, and you had the win over this guy. It would. I mean, he said on your show, I think it would make him at least in the conversation of the all-time greatest.
I agree.
And I don't know if it would make him number 1, but he's right. It absolutely puts him in the
And it
conversation.
solidifies their rivalry to something that I don't know. I don't know what else can come near their rivalry given those circumstances, the way it's played out, and just how personal this thing is, and it still continues to be personal, even though it has nothing to do with John Jones. It has everything to do with John Jones. You know what I mean?
It's amazing.
They complement each other. Last thing on this, Cormier is a little bit older and he's short and he's stocky, and John is tall and long and they're sort of young versus old, but also like the way in which their games are different, and even more than that, outside the cage. You mentioned Daniel Cormier is getting all those opportunities. In part, he's getting them because he's good at the things that John is not. Career, at least at this point. Obviously, he missed weight in the Olympics, but career management. And John is, maybe you could argue, probably a better fighter, maybe, but he can't bring that to bear enough because of what. So like there are these,
amazing.
and they're able to like one up each other. It's an amazing arms race between these two.
I love it, and I'm not convinced that it's over. I'm not convinced that rivalry is over. Okay, we'll have plenty of time to talk about
That
this
would be
fight.
the condition that Cormier sticks around longer than he is.
Yeah.
As if he knew he could get that John Jones.
I believe that 100%. Okay, I want to talk about Ronda Rousey for a second, and I don't want to talk about like, the pointing and the debut. I'm sure we've all seen it to some degree, and I don't want to talk about that. You know
for
why?
posture when she
Because the biggest there are 2 big takeaways from Sunday night, her debut in World Wrestling Entertainment.
Talking about wrestling now?
Oh, no. Just listen to me. Don't be that guy. Don't listen to me. Listen. Don't be the internet. Listen, I have a very strong question that I want to ask you guys. There's a takeaway here. They don't want us to talk about Ronda. They don't. They don't want this. They're done with Ronda. Like I've seen the comments. Yes, they don't want this.
I know.
They're not interested in it. That's the takeaway. If WWE thinks that they are going to bring over the UFC fan to watch her, it's at least in our little bubble, it's not happening. And that to me is not surprising.
You don't think so? I
but
mean,
it's
just
evident.
the first part, right? I feel like people tune in to watch her the first time.
The reaction to this
I
has
understand.
just been. I mean, I put up a poll, around 25,000 votes. over 65% said, I do not care. And then 20% said, I care very little. And to me, there's a story there. And what is the story? Why do they care so little about Ronda Rousey? Why are they not happy for her moving on with her life? Why are they not rooting for her to succeed there? And I want to hear your take. I have a take. I want to hear your take.
She didn't let him.
It smacked me right in the face. Like, these people they are not following her over there. They want nothing.
I think if you don't care, you don't respond to the poll. I think that there's a lot of people out there who care, but they see her as
it's hard to
in a
take
negative
seriously
light.
That hat, by the way. Can we take it off? It's ridiculous.
Only for the wrestling segment.
Okay. But this is not about the wrestling. It's about Ronda Rousey.
All right, I'll put it back on when we talk about wrestling.
Thank you.
No, I think that
He likes his gimmicks,
people loved to see her get her comeuppance, and they didn't like the way she reacted, and they're still holding that grudge. People still hold that grudge, and so for people to answer, I don't care. It just tells me that people care. They don't care in a
You're not buying
let's go Ronda, you're gonna go over and conquer the new world. It's more like, yeah, she stinks. She's gonna, the people are just gonna be.
But they're still going to watch?
I think so.
Really?
I think people will. I think people.
There appears to be
think
some
they'll-
vitriol.
So just on this last.
They
thing
won't admit
that
it, though.
Was it the Royal Rumble? Everybody's sort of anticipating her being there, So
Yeah.
it's like, but that kind of is the feeling. And then you see her again. There's this rev up again of just who Ronda Rousey is, like the kind of star that she's basically dimmed and hid. Like she's not had it out there in a while. And you see it again. I just feel like by the time it comes around, MMA fans, a lot of MMA fans just don't like wrestling, and a lot of them don't like Ronda Rousey. But I think there'll be a general intrigue to just kind of tune in for a minute to see this. I personally would have no interest in her long story arc against everybody, but I'd be interested to see how she does.
The first one.
The first one, so the big one that's coming up, WrestleMania. I'd be very interested to see how that plays out. But I honestly believe if she didn't, you could make an argument that where she was and the way she lost was one of the worst handlings by a professional athlete to a loss ever.
Period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody. If all sports. I honestly tried to think about this and I was like,
Me too.
I couldn't think of somebody who did a worse job of alienating her fans, the people who put her on this pedestal. And I know that and she embraced that pedestal while it was there, but she couldn't do anything with that sort of championship mindset to console her fans or to say, like, I'll be back or whatever. It was almost like she went into a power sulk and went away. And then she comes back, no media, does the same thing. It's beyond me why she handled herself that way. And even in the SNL skit we talked about, there was no levity to it. Going into her new realm right now, you're like, will she be able to, can they address this? Can they address her UFC career is why she's there.
Yeah.
So if they can't address it in full, if they can't prod at it, if they can't make heels and they can't do things, I don't know how it works.
Okay, so then how about the fact that she does this sit-down interview with ESPN's Ramona Shelburne, and she asks her about the losses.
Yeah.
And what does she do? And this is the second takeaway.
She literally turns away.
like
Turns
10
away and says,
seconds.
I'm not talking about it.
Yeah.
10 seconds.
This was your chance. This was your chance to eliminate all those questions from now until tournament. You address it once and you move on, and she still can't do it.
I was shocked.
And I have a hard time relating to someone like that at this point. Like as a human being, we go flip side to someone like Cormier who talks about his losses and his setbacks even more eloquently than he does his triumphs, and you're still treating this like it was the end of the world, like it was some kind of disaster that plagued mankind. It was a loss. Holly Holm has lost 3 times since you lost to her. You know what I mean? It's not that big.
Got
a deal.
back up in the saddle again and again.
It's not that big a deal, and I felt like that was the perfect opportunity, and she blew it again.
Also kind of amazing that she can only speak to one person. Ramona's it. You got questions for her?
That's her
Too
personal.
bad, so sad.
Wait, I didn't.
But that's actually important. That Ramona Shelburne is a a very gentle interviewer, somebody who kind of sits there and I think that the athletes kind of trust her, that she's not going to she's not going to blindside them or anything. And even in that scenario, even with a very friendly interviewer, she still couldn't find a way to address that question that was posed in the least accusatory way possible. Yeah. So that's actually, I think that really is important.
Think about somebody in another situation who would answer a question like that. What would be the context? I don't know exactly, but my hunch is that it would be somebody like losing a spouse and to death, losing a child, right? Tell me about your child who died, of age 2.
Dredging up a war.
You could barely muster enough energy or the emotional resources to even talk about such thing. And even then, I've seen parents who've been able to, to find a way to gut through it, and she can't. To me, some sort of part of her identity died. She made an interesting claim. She went into judo, it was all she cared about, and she wanted to win the Olympics, and it didn't happen. And then she sort of found MMA, and she thought she was going to be something, and to some extent she was, right? Like, by all measurements, her career was a success. Not a perfect success, but a success. And then in the end, it wasn't what she thought it was, and now she's trying this new venture. To me, she's running from something. She's trying. There's something that's eating at her. She's running from, and I don't know what that is. I'm not equipped to make that kind of a.
Wasn't it clear what she's running from? I mean, she failed in MMA. Meaning, I don't think her.
No, but I mean internally about how she understands herself and her place in the world. I don't mean merely just the failure or the sadness or the fact that she lacks the emotional resources to deal with it.
Is it because that her identity was I have to be undefeated? So in the world of wrestling, she can't be undefeated.
But like every champion has that. It's more than that. Every champion believes they're the best.
She believed it though,
Yeah.
without the quotes.
Right.
She believed it. 'Cause she believed all of that stuff.
Like it was religious prophecy, and then when your religion dies, what do? Last thing on this, I don't know much about professional wrestling. But my producer on my show made a point. He's like, "What is she gonna do if it turns out she's bad at this?" And the crowd in Pick a City starts chanting, "Holly."
Her new competition is performance, so she's going to have to perform to her obsessive level, right? Like if she doesn't, I don't know how that's going to affect her because that's a tough gig, man. What she's going into, as she well knows, we've seen other people make.
Just ask King Mo, Tito Ortiz,
and even Shayna. Like Shayna's been doing a great job, but obviously she's buddies with Shayna, and Shayna has to make a slow grind to get there, And I'm like, there's huge risk for her because of that, because of her mental makeup. Just that we know as MMA fans, you wonder if she can't excel at performing the way she does. That's why when you mentioned, I think it was you mentioning the Paul Heyman and all that stuff, you're like, you might want to facilitate this the best you can to make it an easier transition for yourself, so you're not putting that much onus on yourself to meet your own expectations. But I hope she's able to do that because I honestly don't know what happens to her at that point if she doesn't.
It seems to me that Ronda Rousey obviously has had strengths and weaknesses, and as an athlete, a lot of strengths. I mean, she really, she was legitimately a great fighter for a very one-dimensional, but great fighter for a spell. But the other side of the game, where you have to talk, where you have to present yourself, that's never been a strength of hers. And now she's entering a realm where being a great fighter is not important. They are scripting out what she has to do and who whether she's going to win or lose. All that stuff is taken care of for her. But what she has to do is be a performer. She's going to have to do things that I think come unnaturally for her. I think it puts a lot of pressure on the folks in WWE to craft her career in a very, very careful way because. Like you said, if the crowd turns against her, or if they say, well, here's this match you're going to lose, and she, I realize it's different losing in a thing where you're acting as opposed to losing in an actual competition. But for Ronda, I just wonder whether even her ego would be able to handle that kind of loss that's even scripted out. I mean, I really wonder. I wouldn't say that about anybody else, but having seen the way she has reacted to her actual losses, I wonder whether she will be able to handle losing in a match where she knows before she walks into the ring that she's going to lose.
We mentioned before, like Conor McGregor always has a very good finger on the pulse of what's going on around him. Like he understands his times, he understands what he's doing. I sometimes feel like she's kind of lost touch through these last couple of years too. Like just even, I believe it was on this interview, she was talking about Dana White trying to convince him to come to an event. Was this part of this interview? Do you guys recall this?
WWE event?
Yeah, trying to get him over there. But she talked about him.
She's done a lot of interviews lately, so it's probably that one.
It was that one. But I was wondering if did you catch that part? She's basically like, he hasn't been, I want him to I want him cage side. And she's talking about him and you're thinking.
Ringside.
Ringside. But you're thinking, this isn't the way people feel. This isn't the way people feel about Dana White. She's talking about him like this very warm figure, kind of, getting gooey, talking about him. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is just the world has changed so much since she was doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Dana White is just, nobody's feeling her feel-good story here when she's talking about Dana White, converting him, making him a fan. I'm like, it was very weird. But it's stuff like that, you're like, how in touch is she with all that's going on around her? I think she even mentioned she doesn't really pay attention too much to what's going on in MMA at this point.
Sure. You know, I want to tell the audience, once again, we are not going to break down her weekly appearances on WWE Raw or whatever. I just felt like it smacked me in the face. Like, I expected it. I mean, we've been talking about her sort of, you know, her, I don't want to call it demise, but, you know, her two fights.
Exit.
Yeah, her exits, and it was a very abrupt one. I mean, we never really had closure to it. We've been talking about it for a year change now, and it even dates back to the Holly Holm loss, but it was just, it was somewhat surprising to see just how much people don't, or at least they're claiming not to care, don't want to watch or support or be happy for her. I mean, I don't think that we would see that with many others.
She strikes me as and I'm saying this from the reaction, as like the false idol. You know what I mean? Like the type of person who people really believed in on some level, and she let them down in the end. That's what it strikes me as. Like, that's the general, when people are just, nope, I'm done with that. I'm not going to follow her. I'm not going to care about her anymore. That's the kind of thing it feels like. It's that personal to people, you know what I mean?
Is the damage done forever? Or, you know, if she smartens up and does some sort of sit-down interview and just sort of bears her soul once and for all and talks about what she went through after the loss to
That would be
Volume 1.
huge, because isn't this pent up? Where you're talking about the sense of closure, there's no resolution. And then I feel like she's distanced herself from the place that made her who she is, you know? And it's
Such a bad PR move to handle it that way, right? Like, you would imagine that there are people around her who are telling her, like, just talk about it.
I doubt it.
Yeah, but it's
You don't think?
Hell no.
but it's not. I mean, I don't think this is Ronda Rousey being shrewd, or this is who she is, and you know, there's something inside of her that makes her react this way, and you know, I mean, I'm accepting it. I don't blame her for it, or.
But what do you mean? She lost in the Olympics. She talked about the Olympics. She wrote a whole book and talked about worse things have happened to her. You know, her father passed away.
know.
She's talked openly about it.
I know.
She lost an MMA fight. What's the big deal? You know what I mean? Like, I can't wrap my head around the reaction to it.
You know, you have to remember, before McGregor was McGregor, she was the biggest star in this sport. She completely created, in a sense. I mean, I realize that there was Cyborg and there were fighters before her, but she was the one who single-handedly brought this into the UFC.
Sure.
She was such a huge star.
She still did it, though. She still did all that.
Yeah.
She didn't lose
Take it away.
All that stuff, and then all of a sudden, you know, something inside of her just made her not able to accept what happened to her. And
So are they in for a rude awakening? Like, do you think that they're clearly hoping, she's a UFC star, right? She's an MMA star. That's why people
I
know.
think she's a crossover star.
You think so?
Yeah. And I don't know, I saw the reaction from the MMA fan base, which kind of took me by surprise too a little bit. I thought, I don't know exactly what I thought, but I didn't think it'd be that kind of vitriol.
Yeah.
But I did see that, like, on Main Street, I have, you know, you follow Sports Center, it was all over Sports Center.
Yeah.
She does pull outside of MMA in a really interesting way that I think they can still count on that. I think in the end, it's going to be how she does, and I don't know what that's going to be. The only thing that sort of occurs to me about this, lastly, is while I find this almost impossible to believe, there are people who naturally like pro wrestling, like they grow up liking it, like she claims to, and that she would want the opportunity to pursue it makes sense. On the other hand, part of me feels like, well, I couldn't get the ending I want in the Olympics. I couldn't get MMA, but I can just script the reality here. But even that reality, you can't script. So that life will hold a mirror and let you know what's going on, and that will bleed its way into this. You can't run from these
exactly
things.
what I have a piece coming out about this exact thing.
There's a very big difference between her doing this and her going into movies. Because in like movies, people I think would have just been like, all right, cool, you went into movies. But here, because there is this weird relationship between MMA fans and pro wrestling, they're saying exactly to your point, when the going got tough, you went to the fake stuff, and like I've seen that as well. They're using that as sort of.
It was fun in the reverse with Brock Lesnar, because when he first came to the UFC, it almost felt like I couldn't personally, and I think a lot of people struggled to separate the wrestler from the man. You know, this guy, what parts of him were fiction versus what was real when he's talking in his interview. He'd kind of slide in and out of his character. It was very weird. It's a weird transition to go either way. You know what I mean? But I thought Brock handled himself pretty well ultimately, because he's a curmudgeonly guy, you know, who basically let that override everything anyway. But it'd be interesting to see if we're able to, if her personality can do that. Do people see her for both? Can she blend those elements? You know, because I feel like that's the whole trick right now.
Here's another pleasant topic that I know the fans love when we discuss. It's a very simple question. Why won't Mayweather McGregor die? Why is it still here?
Can I make a confession here?
Please.
I have misjudged this fight and their appeal and their.
How so?
every step of the way. Because at first I'm like, I just didn't think it would ever happen. But that's sort of a separate issue. And then I thought, what could on earth be the appeal? And then you'll remember Malignaggi got involved.
Yeah.
What about Conor versus Malignaggi? And I'm thinking to myself,
I'm glad we never discussed that.
and I'm thinking to myself, what kind of a low information voter do you have to be where that becomes interesting to you? And then the fight happens, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, we have satisfied this demand. Surely after seeing bad boxing and a guy gassing in ways that championship boxers never do, and this cheap facsimile of who Floyd used to be, we must have scratched that itch. And it keeps going on. There is something about not merely them two, but them two together that, I mean, the donks get riled up. And I honestly, you asked the question, I have no freaking clue.
They get riled up. They
freaking
get riled up that you talk about it. They get riled up that they have to contemplate it. But they get riled up too thinking about it. It's like it's the weirdest thing ever.
But it's almost like those two don't either notice it or just recognize that enough people will buy into it. It's like clockwork. Floyd comes out with any kind of tweet, Conor responds to him within minutes, and it's like, the best comparison I can make is when Michael Jordan went to play baseball. It was like, okay, it was cool for like a year, but we want to see you back at what you do best. It's like, please stop talking about the White Sox.
It starts becoming toned down.
Like, we don't want to talk about this anymore. We want to talk about Ferguson. Give me Nate Diaz. Give me Nate Diaz 3, 4, 5, and 6 over this. You know what I mean?
When this thing first came up into our consciousness, I've been talking about the boxing match. I remember saying, probably on the show, that the one place where McGregor was going to defeat Mayweather was not going to be in the boxing ring, but it was going to be in all the promotional stuff. He was going to talk circles around him. He was going to just shame Mayweather. Mayweather's never faced anybody who can do what McGregor can do. And I kind of feel like right now, Mayweather's getting a little bit of the upper hand here because he's kind of trolling this whole idea of coming to MMA. And we know that it's serious because Mayweather has built a career on trying to do something that would make the most money for the least amount of risk. So obviously, instead of risking your 50-0 record by taking some boxing match, which you're maybe the best boxer of your generation against somebody, instead he's going to take less money because he'd make less money in boxing than he would in boxing, take less money and compete in MMA that he's never done. And so that would totally fall in line with the character of what Floyd Mayweather is. He's most money, least risk. That is Floyd in a nutshell. And this is not. That's the only thing that we can say. In what universe would Floyd step into an MMA cage for less money and get his ass kicked? Come on.
I don't think it's a coincidence that in basically the same, more or less, not the same calendar year, but the same time frame, that Mayweather-McGregor is this incredibly popular thing that people just want to see it. Now they want to see the reverse. Despite all indications that the first one sucked and the second one would suck in ways that I can barely describe. I mean, you'd have to get Robert Frost resurrected to sort of articulate how much that fight would suck. It's the same time it's happening as the Tide Pod Challenge. Now, that sounds like a bit of a glib comparison, but hear me out. What did Floyd Sr. say about what was the appeal of this fight? He goes, people want to see crazy things. We are living in this age where it's not merely the sort of dare about it all. There's this that we're hurtling towards this space where people just have the satisfaction to see the bizarre. And because these two figures are so popular that it keeps drawing them in certain ways that I don't know what else would. I think people are just bored.
UFC used to have a little more like, I mean, I know that James Toney came over, it was like to do this point, but I felt like they would have, they used to have a little bit more of a process of saying like, no, that's not happening here, Yeah. But then the CM Punk stuff, I mean, you could point out examples, but I feel like having seen it, the UFC might have put their foot down. That's where I'm at though. Now you're like, I don't.
Listen, if I'm the
obviously.
UFC, I'm paying Floyd under the table hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep up this idea that I'm
at least for the year, right? At least until the.
Yes,
100%.
I am paying. I am saying, yo, put out a tweet every week or so of you in a cage, as you did this past week, and just keep this dream alive for another year. It's funny because at times like this, I'm envious of other sports fans, the stick and ball sports fans, who know that, if you're a fan of Kevin Durant, you know that come September, he is going into training camp, he will play in October, and he will play probably till June. If you're a fan of Sidney Crosby, you know the same, right? You know what the schedule is.
Well, Sidney is a little...
You get the point. The thing that I'm tired of in our sport, and in combat sports is this constant sort of teasing on social media. I'm coming back. I'm not coming back. I'm coming back. I'm not coming back. Pay me. Don't pay me. Like,
glad you brought this up.
enough of this. Enough. Like Nate Diaz last week. It's like, I'm coming back to save the day.
Exactly what I
okay, so
saw,
come
too.
back. Or don't come back, but just come back or not come back. Like I'm tired of it already.
I get why fighters individually do it. I can understand from their perspective why it makes sense. But this is why you got to take a moment to sit back and say, "Thank you, Max Holloway."
Yes,
Max Holloway. When it clicks,
absolutely.
When you can set your watch to that guy. Every fighter is going, I don't know how I feel. I don't want to go. I don't know. We'll see. Max Holloway is going the other direction, and everyone is beginning to get
There's a couple
noticed.
others. Hey, credit to Stipe Miocic, who's currently like embroiled in a feud with the UFC. It says, next man up, I'm there.
Sure.
DC, next man up, I'm there, right?
That Max Holloway is emblematic.
Absolutely. No, you're 100%
And
right.
I feel like the more people that realize that what the fans want to see is you fight. We don't want to see your complaints. To an extent, we'll be sympathetic, but that runs out.
No, the Instagram stuff has got to stop. It's got to stop because you know what happens? They post it, they look at the likes, they look at the retweets, they look at the comments. Look how wanted I am. This is great. This is no more, please.
And the Floyd one is particularly noxious because he walks into a cage and goes, huh? Like he's crossing the
people pick
road
it
or
up
something.
like that.
And then I get my timeline. I'm sure yours must have blown up too.
It's embarrassing.
It's like, what is the significance of this? That you need to delete your Twitter account. That's the significance. Kill me.
Yeah, it's a bad thing. Okay, let's move along to a couple more topics before we say goodbye. Let's stay on the positive train here for a second. Let's talk about the UFC on Fox ratings. The UFC on Fox ratings, who hit an all-time low this past Saturday, and it wasn't that much of a surprise. It wasn't the greatest card of all time. It will probably be a low until next month's ratings, and that card isn't much better than this one.
Nope.
I still can't wrap my head around, and I'm looking to you guys for guidance. Why in the contract year are you putting on the worst UFC on Fox cards possible? Is this an indication, in your opinion, of the state of the relationship? What else could it mean? Is it just bad luck? Is it just bad timing? Because I feel like they could move around some things to make those cards better.
They try to stack this card better? Like,
I mean,
I don't remember them doing it.
In fairness to the next card, the main event it's a fine fight, but not an appropriate headliner. The rest of the card's not so bad, but it doesn't. To your point, it has no star power.
Can you name me 3 other fights on the card?
3 other fights, no.
So what's so good about this card? You're talking about this.
Well, I don't think. So if you look at the one that just passed, you had the main event, which was by an indication a respectable contest, and you had you could just sort of cherry pick. Oh, well, Gregor Gillespie's on there. That's interesting. And well, Camacho versus Dober. That's a fun fight. I just mean that. Pull it up on your card.
But we were told, you remember, I remember vividly Lorenzo Fertitta saying, and I know he's not around, but it's the same company that, well, maybe it's not. But anyway, he said pay-per-view title fights, number 1 contender fights, Fox, right? FS1 Fight Pass, it's the up-and-comers.
These ones are weird. I mean, these, especially back-to-back. Like you mentioned the one coming up in Orlando, last week, and I thought, that's true. I hadn't really put them together, to look at them back-to-back. Even this weekend's card in Brazil has more of an intrigue to it, just given Machida, and Shevchenko was on it. There's some names on it that it would look better than the card that just happened in Charlotte. I was in Charlotte, but it was just to attend with a buddy and some other guys. But there was no buzz in the city. It's like a very, it's a micro way to look at it, but there was no buzz in the city. The upper deck was pretty empty, and it's just, you think, man, this is the Fox card. Like, you're seeing it live and you think this is not what you expect from these things. Like, you expect that to be basically a pretty similar in a way to a pay-per-view in terms of the draw, like who's going, the intrigue to it. But this one just didn't have it. And I don't know. It's like you get Jacare, I know he's kind of up there, but Brunson being just a local guy, they're kind of just tying him regionally, and then the rest, I don't know. It just, nothing about it really struck the chord that their usual ones do. But why that is, I don't know, man. I mean, that's I'm as puzzled as you on that.
I wonder whether the UFC matchmakers somehow had been clued in to the fact that Fox was about to make this huge money deal with the NFL.
No way.
I mean, I wonder if they're like, well, those guys. But to your point, even if that were the case, you still don't want to put your free TV fights, make your free TV fights so unappealing, because even if Fox is not in the game, somebody else could step up and be your free TV partner. So if you're putting all of your, I thought that the UFC was moving away from the idea of putting all of the assets into the pay-per-views and making everything else less important. I thought they were going to try to even those things out a little bit more. It just doesn't seem like that's the case. And
I don't get it either because it doesn't match what the initial Fox card was going to be in, what was it, December? Remember, it was supposed to be Ricardo Lamas versus Jose Aldo, and then the whole thing got changed around. And you thought, okay, when you saw that matchup, wow, they're putting Jose Aldo on a Fox card. Okay, this makes sense in a contract, or heading into a contract year. And now, like something.
So, you think these two cards are just anomalies? Like maybe it's just bad timing?
I'm as baffled as you because if they are tanking, you could say, well, they're tanking. But how do you win when you're tanking in a contract year? I mean, if you had a contract in place already.
Not at all. Like you're talking about, like maybe paying Floyd to like stay on the. These are like your obvious 4 platforms for the year, right? Like these Fox cards, and they're just right now the ones that we know they're just as bad as they get. I think that every fight night you could go back, not every one of them, but most of the fight nights that have happened are better than the card that just happened or the one that will.
Strange.
The fight night happening in Brazil is better than this one.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that particular card at least has a few names on it that you're going to be very intrigued by. John Dodson, you know what I mean? Like guys like that. There just weren't any of that. I mean, it was like very slim pickings on this last one in Charlotte.
I don't know what to make of it.
And weirdly, it wasn't like you could understand that you got to that point if they had a main event and it collapsed and this was the replacement. But this wasn't the replacement. This was the one they picked from the get-go. Like, okay.
Paul Daly, do we want to see him back in the UFC? Do you think that it's possible that he can come back to the UFC? He wants out of Bellator. He wants back in the UFC. It seems. Is this has he paid his debt for the punch?
Man. That happened in 2010.
Could they use him? I mean, you look at this London card. The fans aren't happy about it, and we'll talk about it more in the after the beat segment. But is Paul Daly someone that the UFC could use at this juncture?
I think, of course, they could use him, and they should use him. He doesn't have many fights left, to be honest. Was he 36, 37, something like that?
Just had a knockout of the year candidate.
Over a good UFC fighter, and before that, I forget the guy's name, but he had 2 good wins in a row. Brandon Ward, the double knee, the knockout. I mean, he's obviously still very, very competitive, and I don't know. It used to be the case where if it was like a Jake Shields, where you're at Strikeforce, and there was some, acrimony with him and Scott Coker. Dana White would love the opportunity, not merely because he was ranked, but just to kind of stick it to an organization. He doesn't ever feel like he needs to stick it to Bellator, and that kind of bothers me. He was really competitive. You could count on him to really, make it interesting, and now he's just kind of like, man. I went back and watched that presser. The post-fight one.
113?
Yeah, where he's like, Daly's done here. And the language, go back and watch it. It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
The language is so unequivocal. But it's a lot of things have been equivocal with him, and they're not anymore. So I hope.
I don't think he could really. I mean, there's so much hypocrisy that's happened in that 8-year window that it's kind of like, why hold Paul Daly to one standard and everybody else? So at this point, I'm like, the guy fights the way they want. I mean, he goes in there and he wants to knock the guy out. So I'm like, man, and he's hung around. He's still maintained himself in the spotlight. He's only, 34 years old? He's only 34. He's had a lot of fights, but he still represents a market. I think that he can draw on a little bit. I see no reason for them to keep him out.
Yeah, and he was the guy that MVP was. That was the kind of the heat between those guys would have been kind of fun to
He's probably the second most successful British fighter of the past decade behind Michael Bisping. Am I missing someone?
Ooh. Wow, it's a good question.
He's who's that?
Patty? No, I'm kidding.
Patty Pimblett? Not quite there. I mean, Darren Till will certainly, but he hasn't had
most of them are still.
Ian Freeman, I would not put above him.
Of the past decade.
Yeah. Okay, so then that would include Ian Freeman. You might be right.
Let's end on Michael Bisping. They settled on Rashad Evans, but they haven't been able to come to a deal. That was the fight that was proposed. Bisping said on his podcast that there is a fight that he's mulling over, and now he said he's not fighting on the London card. He hasn't explained why. But if that was the fight, is that a suitable, goodbye fight for Michael Bisping? Was that the right fight to make? It's a rematch of UFC 78. He lost via split decision. Do you like that fight, Jeff, for Michael Bisping? If they, I think
it's a couple of guys who are at a similar place. So that meets my criteria. I actually liked that Bisping went on social media and told his fans, he kind of tread the line. He wasn't saying, hey, don't go to the London fight, but he's like, if you're going to see me, don't buy tickets. And I think that was kind of a good gesture, considering that I'm sure that a good many of the people who would buy tickets would be like, hey, I want to see Michael Bisping's final fight, and they weren't going to get to see that. So I think that was kind of cool he did it. But him and Rashad, every time Rashad has fought in the last, I don't know how many fights now. I've always been thinking, oh yeah, I wish this was the last one, and so I kind of hope that this is the last one. And Bisping,
A double retirement fight.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's what you're hoping for.
I would
How
hope so.
depressing.
I would want that too, to an extent. I mean, Rashad's been on a pretty. I mean, he hasn't won since 2013, and you know, Bisping had his. Yeah, it's like, but Bisping, they're former champs. They both have names, obviously. They had the UFC 78 fight back when they were undefeated. Both of them, remember that, like the whole thing. But it's just, I don't know. It doesn't, like, I was kind of hoping they'd give him Vitor Belfort or something like that.
Yeah.
Some guy that there was going to be an actual
Yeah.
feud like that. But honestly,
But I respect his
looking at
reason
his
for not wanting to fight.
yeah,
Vitor.
yeah, I agree with that. But looking at if you're looking at just something that has history where there's a name attached and all that, I mean, I think that's about as good as they could have gotten, really.
Hate that fight. The first
You
one.
wanted him to fight a monster.
That was that fight when it first happened was the reason Michael Bisping became a middleweight to begin with, and it sucked because Rashad just tried to take him down the whole time, and by the end Michael was able to stop the takedowns, and he won via I think a very lackluster split decision.
Yeah.
The fight was terrible. More to the point,
Rashad beat him.
Rashad won, but
Yeah, yeah.
barely.
Yeah.
And more to the point, I've said this before. Y'all disagree with me, but I'm going to stick to it. You got these aging veterans giving an aging veteran who hasn't won in however long, versus another. Now Michael also had a bit of a rough run, but of course has been a little more successful of late. But the point being is, if you're trying to show to feather the bed for Rashad Evans' exit, you don't feather the bed. You give him a destroyer, and you make it unequivocally clear that this is not the place for you anymore. Because if you keep giving them this soft feathered bed, they keep kind of hanging around. I think you make it very clear. Give him somebody tough. Michael,
and they feathered the bed several times.
But that works in the old Zuffa
lost.
where they essentially just took whatever is given to them. In this era, I feel like the fighters have a little more control as to how they leave. Look,
I'm not mad at Rashad for taking fights that he thinks are good for him. I'm just saying, as if you're asking me,
this is more about Bisping than Rashad, right?
yeah. And then Bisping, I mean, I just don't like that fight for Bisping because I didn't think the first one was good.
Yeah.
And for Rashad, it's like if you're hanging around, give the guy a tough fight and then make it
So
clear.
you love this Eric Anders Lyoto Machida fight?
Love it.
Love it.
For two reasons. One, I like the fact that he was no bones about it, knew exactly what he was going to call out. He said he knew he was going to call him out if he won, so I like that he planned it. Number two, one of my big criticisms of not Darren Till specifically, but what's happening with Darren Till, whoever's fault it is he had this amazing win in October, and I said this on Twitter. I don't think that he can't still build off that momentum. I think he can. But if you look at Conor McGregor and some of the ACL injury notwithstanding,
Yeah.
he only took like 4 to 6 months off between fights, which
Yeah.
means he was very, very, very active.
Yeah.
Anders is getting right on top of it,
Yeah.
getting big names, calling them out, staying active. I think his last fight was in December or something. Before that, only 5 or 6 months before. I love how he's striking while the iron is hot.
But for Lyoto Machida, he's the older guy who just got knocked out,
Yeah.
who's fighting essentially in his hometown, and he's fighting like the killer.
Yep. If you're good enough, he'll beat Machida and then use that as a popularity boost for himself, which is we feed the elderly to the young in this sport. That's how it has to
Are you
happen.
surprised Machida's taking this fight? Or is this like Paulo Costa versus Johnny Hendricks all over again, or is Anders not that guy?
I don't know, man. You do feel like this is kind of his outro, though, and this is what they're thinking a little bit. Because how old is Machida? And he
he's
has
close to
not
40
looked,
at this
he has not looked as good, obviously. So I feel like this is a little bit of like a do or die for him, you know?
Yeah.
The outro.
You have no say on any of this, Jeff.
Yeah, that one's
That's just your
that's not a yeah exactly.
Will you even watch this fight, Jeff?
I will watch it. Yes, but I will not. Yeah, I will watch it. I won't be writing about it. So
Will you watch it live?
probably maybe
1 in the morning?
maybe not.
Why the F you lying?
I will tape it.
If you're that on the fence, there's no way you're
I
saying
will.
it's
I
till
will
1 in the
maybe.
morning.
I might watch it live, but I'll be taping most of the rest of the card. And
To your point, to end on a positive note, like there's some important, the Shevchenko fight, that's probably a #1 contender fight, right? Especially if she wins, right, in that division.
Sure. John Dodson versus
Pedro Munoz.
Pedro Munoz, and to open that card, Anthony Lionheart Smith versus Thiago Santos. I love that fight.
Yep. But I mean, it's amazing what they've done with Nico Montano since she won that flyweight belt. Like she just
Isn't she
won.
injured? She's banged up, right?
No, I know, but I just feel like there's been like no sort of like showing up as a guest fighter, like in the crowd, sitting there. She just kind of won and just disappeared. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, good thing we're adding divisions to the UFC. That's
Yeah.
really what we need to do.
they'll probably announce her title fight on a Friday night at like 7. Next time they'll do it like during the State of the Union address.
Right.
Like let's get the
Yeah,
big
yeah.
news out while there's a ton of other stuff going on.
Is the missile going to hit Hawaii?
No,
Fight
Super Bowl
announcement.
this Sunday. Watch. Conor McGregor's return will be announced during the Super Bowl. Not on the Super Bowl, but like on
Right.
Twitter or
Yeah,
something
on
like
Twitter.
that. Okay, on that note, now it's time for everyone's favorite segment. It's time for After the MMA Beat. We're going to go exclusively on Twitter. You have been sending us questions using the hashtag the MMA Beat. You have replied to our tweets. We go over to live.twitter.com/MMA Fighting for the next 30 minutes. By the way, we addressed this last week, and we may have addressed it 2 weeks ago, but the reason the show's on early is because of this man. He has so much power that he
Really?
completely changed
You're really gonna drop
the
dimes?
start time of this program. It's unbelievable the power that. Look at those arms. 24-inch pythons.
Just leave me alone, will you?
Okay, go to Twitter right now. After the MMA Beat, we're answering your questions for the next 25 minutes. Go there. We'll see you there. Starts right now.